boy. Hey. What's going on, man?
Yes, it's that time again, and it's part 5, the best of parts, the last of parts. A satisfying summer blockbuster conclusion, if you will. And if you've seen the previous videos and were waiting for this one, sorry it took so long. The reason is I was fixing bits of the house that were falling off, because some builders like to cut and run, but that's a story for another time. Here's a quick recap of this particular story, what we're doing right now. As with an advent calendar, I open an envelope each day to discover a mystery art supply inside. I'm only allowed to use the art materials inside, but I can use my own tools. If there's no art materials inside, I can use up to 3 previously provided materials, and I'm only allowed to draw from this one still I've seen. And that's all the info that you really need. Let's go get this Moby Dick. Ooh, a nice fatty brush. So we have another pure squirrel brush. This one's quite bigger than the other one, so there's quite a few bold squirrels running around this time. And we'll be using both the kids paint and the Japanese watercolors, seeing as how one has very muted colors and the other one has extremely bright, happy looking colors. So I'm trying to do a wash here with the watercolors. As you can see, it's not penetrating the paper until I go over it quite a few times. But when I do, then you can go crazy with the bleeding and the intermixing of the different colors, especially if you leave a bit of water on the paper. And again, it doesn't bleed into the dry bits, it's only the ones that you've made wet. And you can go in with a bit of toilet paper there and just get rid of some of the extra water. Because of the muted colors of the Japanese watercolors, I went in with the cheapo kids paint there and tried to brighten it up a little bit. And of course the kids paints don't bleed as much, and once it dried a little bit, I've added a bit more. Just a bit more definition there. Wow, that's an interesting, if a bit messy result. Yeah. Intriguing. Not entirely convinced the combination was a successful one, but I can definitely see some potential there. I'm quite interested in the way the Japanese watercolors, as they dry, they kind of crackle and leave these darkish patches. That might be something worth exploring in the future. Let's move on, baby. Oh, it's a funny times again. Alright, so I gotta listen to 81 by Joanna Newsom and create a piece of art inspired by the tune. And for this challenge I'll be using the same combo as last time, but a finer brush, just so I can make actual better marks. Alright, so after listening to the song, which is a very whimsical sounding, folky, Kate Bush kind of vibe, I thought that the fat lady that's been resting all this time, watching me draw her like the one from Titanic, just sitting there enjoying the view, I thought she would jump up and dance among the fruits. Because, you know, whimsical, right? Especially after that depressing looking portrait I did of her with all the muted colors. I thought I'd do her justice and show that she can bust a move as well, you know? I thought that she could bust a move. She can move around when she wants to. She can cut the rug with the best of them. But yeah, Joanna Newsom, never heard of her before this challenge, but if you're a fan of Kate Bush or whimsical lady singers, she'll be right up your alley. Here we can see the kids' colors coming into play. Very bright, not as sharp as the Japanese watercolors, but I think the colors speak for themselves, especially after the last muddy fiasco, which is partly due to the massive brush I used. So here with a finer brush, I'm definitely having a better time. And here we go, a nice whimsical picture there, inspired by the song 81 by Joanna Newsom. I gotta say, this challenge really kicked me up the ass because I wasn't expecting this kind of task. I would have preferred some art materials, and getting inspired by songs is not something that usually happens under duress. But I think the result actually turned out really nice. I like it. Perhaps partly because I was sick of drawing the same scene over and over, and the fat lady jumping up and dancing, it's just cool, man. Ooh. And that is a bottle of brown ink by Wallace Seymour Fine Art Supplies. Paris Brown. Now I'll be using the squirrel brush from before, the fatty one, because I think it'll do a nice wash. So again, I'm applying a bit of water to the paper and just seeing how the ink reacts to it. It's quite a bit different from the watercolors. But again, it's got that bubbling over the waxiness of the paper. You can definitely see how it's a bit different to the watercolors though. yeah, you can get quite detailed even with a thicker brush. Just depends on if you've wet the paper beforehand or not. One of the most fascinating things about this paper is the way it makes the more liquid mediums bubble up on the surface until you smush them together and work them into the paper itself. And here I'm trying to use that to my advantage before I go crazy with any washes. And yeah, just adding more and more color, you get a very different looking range to what the watercolors did. And one of my favorite effects is when ink dries. So here I'm using a fan to promote that process. Wow, now this ink is the real deal. Yeah, this ink is good. I've used inks in the past which were good, but not as good as this. I mean, look at the range of different colors you can get, the different kinds of textures. It's just one color, but you can get really dark the more you go over it. Like the thicker patches look almost black. You could get some really nice textured washes with this one, I'm sure. And even with a thicker brush, you could get quite a lot of detail if you make specific considered marks, as opposed to just slapping it on like I did in one of the previous ones. Yeah, very nice. I enjoyed this one. This one definitely ranks among the top ones for me. And let's see what the last one is. Ooh, this looks fancy. Nothing else in the envelope, I'm sure. Alright, so this is the infamous G pen nib. I wasn't aware of this when I was drawing with it. There is a subtle G on the nib itself, and the Tokyo slider holder. And I'll be obviously using it with the ink that came in the previous challenge. I think that was the idea. Okay, here we go. So the G pen nib is quite often used by manga artists in Japan, and the G one is quite famous in that industry. So while I wasn't aware of this as I was using it, I just thought it was a regular calligraphy pen. You can definitely see how fine some of the lines can go. Yeah, and the ink is working quite well with it as well. I mean, like I've said in the previous challenge, it is a nice ink. Now if you compare this to the felt tip pens, the fine liners from some of the previous challenges, you can see how much quicker you can set the lines down, how much more varied the line can be depending on how hard you press. And even on this challenging paper, it's doing really quite well. I mean, compared to the ink pens, this is a whole different animal. You can't really say which one is better per se. I mean, obviously it's doing better in this challenge, but it is a different way of drawing. And I have to say, this one beats all the pens in the previous challenges just because it's working so well with the paper. It's like, imagine if you had a knife. Instead of pressing down with a knife, you slice with a knife. It's a cleaner cut, there's less effort, and you don't break what you're cutting. You just cut straight through it, and you don't break the fibers while you're cutting. something more organic about this one. And the way you can make it bleed ink as well, if you want a really thick blob on there. You can't really do that with pens. Now the downside is that you can easily make a whoopsie doodle and just make a big blotch somewhere. Whereas with pens you have that control. And I suppose a skilled hand doesn't really make much mistakes. As you can see, I'm not a skilled hand. Here we go, it's the finished result, and yeah, I can definitely see why manga artists choose this over felt tip pens or fine liners. It's just the thickness of the line can be changed at a whim, something that's much harder to do with a felt tip or a fine liner. There's obviously challenges involved with this, but yeah. And there she blows, that's the end of her. The finish, the future, the past, the flush. This was just a memory, and now it's done. Big time done. For real done. Was it fun? Yes, it was. Did the video take 20 times longer than the book to draw? Yes, it did. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe I'll do another one. And if you have an idea for an art challenge, or some tips of a hot, cool, interesting, or weird art material to try, do comment below. It may just be the kicker for a new video. This is all for you, after all. And with that, au revoir.